I'm Dr. Amanda Hendrix-Komoto, and you're listening to Gospel Tangents.
The best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. We talk a lot about racism in the LDS Church, but it's usually about black members of the church. There's also Native American and Polynesian racism, and Dr. Amanda Hendrix-Komoto is the author of Imperial Zions, and we're going to talk a lot about that in our next book, in our next conversation. And oh, by the way, she's given me an extra copy of this book, so we'll be giving that away. So go to gospeltangents.com/contest, and you could win an autographed copy from Amanda. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited to have an amazing historian who comes all the way from Montana for this interview. So could you go ahead and tell us who you are and where you teach?
I'm Dr. Amanda Hendrix-Komoto. I am a historian who specializes in the history of the American West, particularly religion and gender and sexuality, and I live in Bozeman, Montana, and teach at Montana State University.
The Bobcats.
That's right.
All right. So the other interesting thing is, so Amanda grew up in my mother's hometown of Blackfoot, Idaho, and I am really excited here. I have an Idaho potato right there. She wrote that.
They give those out for free, you know.
Oh, okay.
Although only to Idaho residents, you can get them a pack of 50 for free a year as an Idaho resident, but they charge me $8 because I no longer live there.
Oh, no way.
I know.
That's lame. So, Amanda, it's really interesting. You're not Mormon, but you are a Mormon studies scholar. How did that work?
So as you know, since your mother is from Blackfoot, I grew up in southeastern Idaho. I'm born in Pocatello and then moved to Blackfoot when I was little. And that is a heavily Latter-day Saint area.
Very heavily. We've got the Idaho Falls Temple. That's where my mom was married.
And Rexburg is just going to have two temples.
Yeah, that's right.
One's next to the Panda Express, which is, a great location for a temple.
Uh-huh.
But yes, it's a really heavily Latter-day Saint area. My family on my father's side was heavily Latter-day Saint. I think the earliest members of my family to converted in the 1830s in upstate New York, and then followed all the way down.
Oh, so you have you're like a Mormon pioneer stock.
Yeah, so my dad is an ex or Jack Mormon. It's a little unclear, and it really depends on sort of which period of his life you're talking about. He's still alive, so he could, change still.
Okay.
But he was the one who left. Yeah, so he was president of his seminary at Pocatello High School.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then he decided to go in the Army instead of a mission because he couldn't afford a mission. And he married my mom, whose family was a mix of like Catholic and Pentecostal and New Agey stuff. And then he eventually lost his faith or had a faith crisis. And so I was not ever christened or baptized or blessed within the LDS Church, but my grandma was Mormon, my dad was ex-Mormon, and I have attended many, many 3-hour-long blocks, which I know no longer exist, but yeah.
Did you go to seminary?
No, they tried to convince me. I went to Blackfoot High School, and when you were in between...
My mom was a Snake River Panther.
Oh.
Blackfoot High School didn't exist back then.
Yes, it did. And
it did,
yes. It's existed since the early 20th century. Snake River is like, one, not part of Blackfoot, and two, like a little rural community off to the side.
Oh.
They're lovely people. They just happen to be our high school rivals.
I thought Blackfoot didn't exist. That's what I always grew up with. But
well, your mom's a Panther, that's why. So in between middle school and high school, they would send like kids around, and they brought a plate of cookies and chocolate chip cookies and asked me if I was going to do seminary, and I said, no, I'm not Mormon. They assured me non-Mormons took seminary, which I knew wasn't true. Huh. But I took the cookies, but I did not enroll in seminary.
Well, so this brings up a story. Steve Pinecker met a Muslim in, I think it was in Florida. He talked about it on my podcast, who the Muslim attended seminary.
Oh.
I think it was early morning in Texas or something. Anyway, so there are some.
I
At least one.
I would have had to choose between like band, debate, and AP classes, and I was not going to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. There was no appeal. Like, I'm sorry. They did have like dollar hot dog feeds. I went to those, if that counts for anything. I don't know.
So, so Christina Rossetti, she went to Institute, and they had the potato bar Tuesdays or Thursdays, I don't remember, which of course they would have potato bar in Idaho, right?
Yeah.
But you never did that either?
I don't remember. We had a potato bar every day in middle school. I don't remember if the seminary had one. Maybe. I don't like potatoes. I don't know if you know that. I think they're kind of gross.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
My mom worked at a potato factory, so I think it's overexposure.
Was it like Frito-Lay or Lay's potato chips or something? Ruffles?
No, it's basic American foods, and they...
Clover Club?
I don't even know what that is.
That was the big potato chip thing in Utah. Kaysville was the home of the Clover Club factory for potato chips.
Okay.
It's since been torn down, but...
I don't know how much...
It's a big brand here in Utah.
Okay. I will try it one day. I don't know that your listeners really care too much about potatoes, but I will tell you, Blackfoot is the home of the Idaho Potato Museum.
Okay.
They have free taters for out-of-staters.
Oh, wow.
It used to be a real potato, but now it's dehydrated hash browns. And then my husband is from Ontario, Oregon, which is where the tater tot was invented by two Mormon brothers, Nephi and something Griggs.
Oh, okay.
Golden, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, and if you talk with Lindsay Hansen Park, she will tell you that Shelley, which is really close to Blackfoot, has like a potato festival. Yeah, so there's lots of potatoes in the area, but I don't want to have one.
Well, very good. All right. Well, enough potato history.
Yeah, you've exhausted my knowledge of the potato.
I will say John Huntsman was from Blackfoot too.
That's true. And Ben Park, and I think Davis Britton, or Bitten.
Yeah, Bitten.
No R, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that about Davis.
Fact check that, but I think so.
Wow. And Ben Park.
I know.
We need to get Ben on Gospel Tangent. Come on, Ben.
He's actually from Snake River. He'll tell you he's from Blackfoot, and it's a lie.
That's very funny. All right. Well, let's dive into your book. You've written a book recently. Now, here's the cool part. I don't know why I've been giving away so many books lately, but I've just been lucky. But we're going to be giving away another an autographed copy of, tell us the name of the book.
Imperial Zions, Religion, Race, and the Family in the American West and the Pacific. I feel like I should Vanna White it.
There you go.
Yeah.
That was a very good Vanna.
Thank you.
So, yeah, it was a great book. We met last fall. It's been a long time. A lot of you know I like to do these in person. I was with my family. My son went to Montana on his mission and served some time in Bozeman as well. And so we got together. I got 2 copies, but it's taken until now to get Vanna White here to come to Utah.
You're just a slow reader, let's be honest.
Well, I do read faster when I know I have an upcoming interview, so I was slow with this one, but I did read the whole thing. So
you got further than my father, so it's okay.
So it's very interesting in the fact, I mean, you can start where you want, but one of the things that was really interesting to me was you talked about Pacific Islanders, which is something that, I think a lot of people know there's a lot of Polynesians in the church, but you talked about that, and I've driven on I-15 past Iosepa so many times and had no idea until I read your book what the significance of that was. So let's dive in.
So when I originally had conceived of the book, it didn't actually have Pacific Islanders in it. And the reason that they were added is I went to the University of Michigan, and there was a man there.
Go Wolverines, huh?
That's right.
You lost
go
your
Blue.
coach, Jim Harbaugh.
He wasn't that good anyway.
National champ?
Okay. Fair. But we used to be the winningest team in all of football, and I feel as though it's been a long, hard road. The year I started there was the year they lost to Appalachian State.
Oh.
And so it's been a very disappointing relationship between me and Michigan.
You can't blame that on Harbaugh. He brought you back.
I know. But has he, like...
That was Lloyd Carr.
That's true. Has he has he restored the Michigan record, or is he still...
Well, I don't follow Michigan football that closely, but they won the national championship last year, and then he ditched Michigan for the Chargers. I almost said San Diego, but they've moved to LA, the LA Chargers.
I don't know sports that well, I'm sorry. But while I was at Michigan, I do actually... So Damon Salesa was a professor there, and he is Samoan and then Pakeha from New Zealand. And Pakeha is the word that they use there for white settlers.
Okay.
And there are many, many Latter-day Saint Samoans, but his Mormon side was actually through the Pakeha side. And he really encouraged me to think about Pacific Islanders. And I think one of the reasons why it worked so well for the book is I'm really thinking about Mormon empire in this book. And when Mormons think about sort of Lamanites from the Book of Mormon, they're thinking both about Pacific Islanders and about Native Americans, but rarely do we put those in the same frame. And then for my advisor, for Damon, who I taught, even though I know nothing about sports in the world class with, it was personal for both him and I, because both of us are non-Mormons who come from or who have Latter-day Saint background in some way.
Oh, wow.
And so he would tell me sometimes that, like, Amanda, sometimes I read stuff in your book and then I've got to, talk to my family afterwards. And it makes it much harder knowing, this particular thing than if I hadn't known it.
I see.
And so it was a way of bringing those sort of different connections together. So that's how the Pacific Islanders came in. It's interesting because even though, as I say in the book, there's some success among Native Americans, the success among Polynesians and people in Latin America has been much greater. And I think in a lot of ways, the Saints have celebrated that success. And they've also celebrated Native Americans in some problematic ways and in some good ways. But it's easy to think of Polynesians as like the happy converts and not to think of the colonialism and the pain and the things that have happened
there. Who wants to talk about colonialism?
It's a painful topic, but obviously an important one.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So do you want me to tell about the history, or how do you want to go forward?
Well, you're the expert here, so I'll let you go where you want to go.
So we can talk a bit about Polynesians in Tahiti and in Hawaii and the conversion, and then maybe about the meanings of Yosepa and Washaki. Is
that how you say it? I said it wrong. Iosepa?
So the rule in Polynesian languages, and I am no expert, is that you pronounce every vowel, but you say it really fast. And so the way that I've heard it pronounced by both my advisor and then by other people is Yosepa. But I don't speak Native Hawaiian. I'm only mimicking what I've heard from other people who would know.
Well, cool, because like I said, I see the sign, it looks like Iosepa.
Yeah.
I had no idea how to say it. That's how I said it.
It's named after Joseph F. Smith.
Yeah.
Or sorry, Joseph Fielding Smith. Still Joseph F., but yeah. So I guess we can talk a little bit about how that missionary work and that colonialism begins.
And I will just add a really quick thing, because my friend Paul DeBarth, who's a member of the Community of Christ, his wife is Tahitian. Was one of the, I think I said on there that she was the first woman ordained, because I swear that's what Paul told me. She might not have been the first woman ordained in the Community of Christ, but I didn't know that the Community of Christ is huge in Tahiti. Well, maybe I shouldn't say huge, but there's a large presence there. And your book explains why. Well,
and sort of to put, this will be a good way in. So I think in the United States, we think of that as a small part of Mormon history and the history of the United States. But one of the things that I did is it was very important to me to visit the places I was talking about. And so...
so you went to Tahiti?
I did go to Tahiti.
Nice.
I flew on Air Tahiti Nui, which at the time had a subsidized rate. We paid $800 round trip from LA, and it included 2 or 3 nights in Tahiti in a hotel, and then the hotel in New Zealand. You had to go to New Zealand as well. So it was actually fairly... I know. It was fairly cheap. I was... 7.5 months pregnant at the time. So, and it's a very long flight.
Yes, it is.
So it's not quite as fun as it sounds, but it was important to me to go to Tahiti. And there's very few archival sources in Tahiti itself because of the way that information flows. It usually flows from like the place that's being colonized to the colonizers because people are writing letters back and forth to explain what's going on. But one of the things that I visited while I was in Tahiti was their National Museum. And at the time, they had an entire wall devoted to early Mormon missionary work in the 1850s in the National Museum because they considered it a really important part of Tahitian history. And so what they have on the wall is they have images from the first Mormon missionaries who came in the 1840s, a man named Benjamin F. Gerard, and I don't speak French, so that is nowhere near the correct pronunciation, and then Addison Pratt, describing sort of their experiences in Tahiti. There were other missionaries there at the time, the London Missionary Society, and their interactions with both the London Missionary Society, which is Protestant, and then the French who are coming in and contesting English-British control of the island.
And do I assume the French were Catholics?
Yes. And actually, the Olympics are going on this summer.
Yeah.
And
right now?
Yeah, they're holding the surfing competition in Tahiti. And what they say it for a couple of reasons. They claim it's more sustainable.
Tahiti and France aren't very close together.
No, but Tahiti's still part of France.
It is?
Yeah.
Because I knew they spoke French there in Tahiti.
Yeah. So it's right now it's French Polynesia, and it's still a colonial possession. And so the way that France describes it is that they're holding the games all over France, and that includes Tahiti.
Oh, wow.
And theoretically, there's better waves and prettier backdrops in Tahiti for surfing than if you're like surfing the English Channel or whatever.
I would think so.
I heard a podcast talking about some of the reasons why it may have been the other day. So that's sort of the world that the Latter-day Saints are coming into. And so they have themselves arrayed against these two different imperial powers. And the people who end up converting are people who have felt alienated from this other imperial power, because to have a British missionary there means that you have goods coming in, ships visiting, and so they're hoping that these American missionaries can provide them with some of that access. The Mormon missionaries, the French and the English, don't really like them there because they see them as a representative of the United States. They're quickly
another imperial up-and-comer, I guess.
Well, and the United States is interested because of whaling. I mean, they're in the Pacific in this time period, and it's a real sort of potential threat to have this other missionary group, imperial power, although the United States is nowhere near as powerful as France or Britain in this time period. And the Mormon missionaries, despite their own misgivings about their relationship with the United States, represent that. And so the French and the English don't really want them there, and the British, I should say.
So what time period are we talking about right now?
So 1840s to 1850s.
Okay.
And the Mormons are eventually expelled because of their refusal to submit to French imperial power. And that's when the first Mormon mission to French Polynesia, Tahiti, Tubuai, and those are all islands in the area, ends. And then the reason why the Community of Christ has been so successful there is the Tahitians continue to practice the Mormonism in the absence of these missionaries. And when Pratt leaves, when Gerard leaves, they think it's a monogamous faith. And so when the Brighamites come, the Tahitians are sort of aghast about polygamy. And they see the gospel that the Community of Christ brings as being much closer to what the original missionaries had taught them than what the Mormons from Salt Lake are bringing. Not that the Mormons from Salt Lake don't have conversions, but the Community of Christ is much more successful there. But it's important to sort of think about and to note that these people are converting for their own reasons. And it's very similar in the Hawaiian Islands. The people who convert in Hawaii tend to be those people who felt alienated from the Protestant missionaries. And so in Hawaii, converting to Mormonism in many ways ends up becoming a way of asserting a Hawaiian identity and a stance against the Protestant missionaries. And also because of ideas of gathering, Native Hawaiians had always had a deep connection to the land. And Mormons, one thing, theoretically, although some of the Mormon agricultural practices like irrigation make me question this, theoretically, Mormons also have an idea of sacred land. And so the idea that the land is sacred and you might have a connection to the land is really powerful for Native Hawaiians, for French Polynesians, for Polynesians in general. And Yosepa, I think, is a way to sort of reclaim that connection with the land, and also Laie in Hawaii itself. And that's why I think you see these Native Hawaiian towns being set up, because they allow them to put forth their own interests, to reclaim that kinship with the land, and to create a sacred community for themselves.
Well, very good. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There's a guy here in Salt Lake that's a big, I think he's writing or has written a biography of Addison Pratt. And if you're into the Saints volumes, Addison Pratt's a pretty big character. So that's very interesting.
I've not read Saints. That is a little bit too much into...
too apologetic for you?
Not necessarily too... It's a little bit in the weeds. Like, it is maybe a little too... I hesitate to say that because some of my friends wrote parts of Saints, and so I don't want to have any phone calls or emails after this. But yeah, it's a little too like Deseret booky for me.
Okay.
Is how I will describe it. But it's interesting that he would appear frequently in there because he does not stay with the church, and in fact quickly apostatizes in California after he returns. So I'm surprised that he's a recurring figure.
Well, and I haven't read it, but there's been a couple of episodes that I've listened to where, and they're not it's not reading the Saints book, but they talk about Addison Pratt, and I wish I could remember who the scholar was who's doing a biography on him. I'm trying to remember. Is he related to Parley Pratt? Do you know?
I don't think so. I have not done, I mean, I assume like if you go back 13 generations, there's some common ancestor, but I haven't done the genealogy. So not like immediately related. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting. So the American Mormon missionaries got kicked out of Tahiti, and then the Community of Christ kind of slid in.
Yeah. Decades. So in the late 19th century is when they end up coming back. And they are really successful there. And I think one of the things that the Community of Christ can be proud of is the ways in which they've put Polynesians into positions of power within that church. I don't know, I'm a 19th century historian. I believe it is the best century. So I can't tell you too much about what happens in the 20th century. But it's been really impressive how much they have put people into positions of power. And I'm sure there's still power dynamics and racism. But your friend...
Paul.
Yeah, Paul. I mean, that's one example.
Yeah. I mean, he does talk about the racism that his wife endured. I went to World Conference last year in Independence, and it was amazing to me, you know, with LDS General Conference, when you go... It's typically most of the people from Utah, but when you go to Community of Christ World Conference, you have your African delegation and your French delegation and your Tahitian delegation, and especially the Tahitians and the Africans were very noticeable because beautiful flower print dresses and everything, and so it was such a shock to me. So I would say, even today, there is still a strong Community of Christ presence in Tahiti for sure.
And when I visited, I didn't go to any services. We were only there for a short period. But the churches, you see them walking around. And I am not confident enough in my memory to describe them to you. But I remember them being beautiful.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, I remember white. But that's what I'm hesitant to say that they're painted white for sure. But that's what I remember in my mind.
What was painted white?
The walls of the church, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think, so one of the things that's interesting about Polynesians and Christianity in general is they will talk about having been Christian before the Christian missionaries come. And so for them, it's not necessarily an abandonment of what it means to be Tongan or Samoan or Tahitian, but a fulfillment of that, and really has been integrated into their ethnic identity as well.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Amanda Hendrix-Komoto. She's the author of Imperial Zions. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about faith crisis, the United Methodist Church, and also, did you know that the prophet Joseph F. Smith killed a cat?
Do you want to hear a story about him killing a cat in Hawaii?
Joseph F. Smith killed a cat?
In Hawaii, I know.
Oh, wow. I don't know this story.
I'll also bring in Ina Colbrith, his cousin.
Oh, yes.
Because she loves cats. He not so much.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.